Hello, everyone. I'll give you a second to get connected. Hello, and welcome to the Brooklyn Rail's 1245th New Social Environment. I'm Maggie, a programs associate here at the Rail, and I have the pleasure and privilege of being your MC today for a conversation featuring Kahlil Robert Irving and Ajay Kurian. And now I'll introduce today's guests and host. Kahlil Robert Irving constructs deeply layered ceramic sculptures, paintings, and installations with dense strata of references and citations, awaiting the viewer's exploration without ever offering transparent legibility. Ultimately, Irving's work is about the preservation of history and memory, but with the important caveat that the past always exists within the present. And our host today, Ajay Kurian, is an artist, educator, and writer. Kurian employs a fluid multimedia vocabulary which aims to articulate the social and environmental conditions that govern both our worldly and transcendental face. His work often tries to bridge the gap between the local and the cosmic. He is the founder of New Crits, a global platform for virtual studio mentorship for artists of all backgrounds and experiences, and lives in Brooklyn. And with that, I will hand it over to Ajay to get us started.
Okay. Magali, thanks for that introduction. I appreciate it. And Khalil, thank you for doing this. How you
Gladly,
feeling?
gladly. Just
How you,
shifting a lot, move rooms in my hotel, and just like glad to be here.
well, first off, I just want to say I saw the show at the opening. I'm obviously going to go back, but it's a really beautiful exhibition. I've seen every show you've had in New York, actually, from Calicoon to 47 to Petzl to Canada. So I think that gives me at least some breath and also a way to understand the work. And like before we jump into the particulars, I think the first thing that really jumped out to me about the show is the title of the show, EF3 plus E40, which felt like a really perfect formula to kind of dive into how you think about making work, both on a linguistic level and a sculptural one. So, just doing a little bit of digging, like I didn't E40, I that was easy, but EF3 uh, is like a basically like a ranking for tornadoes and tornado damage. Um, and to me, like mixing the natural and the cultural makes a lot of sense for what you do, and also the idea that there's like this twister um, that's combining so many different things all together, and then pairing that with E40, who is his own kind of twister, pairing a bunch of things together made a lot of sense. And there's something about E40's cadence that also makes sense in the work. So I just wanted to I wanted to hear from you, like, what did that title mean to you? How did that come together? What is the special formula?
I mean, the equation is like trying not to speak directly to pain and trauma and loss, but being able to set some signifiers on en route to kind of give you a basis of the myriad of things that'll be seen in the show. Like how do I talk about a storm without actually having to be, put people in a storm?
Hmm.
And I mean, I think about when I was in high school, my art teacher, my like extracurricular art teacher was like, the difference between making pottery and making art was, and she picked up this pot and she said, well, if the inside of this pot expressed hate and the outside of this pot expressed love, how do you kind of wrestle with that? And, being pottery is just like, this is just an object that can be used and serve either a function or be enjoyed, but it sits in an autonomous life that doesn't necessarily have to engage these outside forces. And so when I
Hmm.
was invited to present this exhibition at Canada, I had some things in progress, and I had all these other things that had been in progress in my brain. And St. Louis recently got hit with a EF3 tornado, and it's pretty sad because we all these white folks and people in the city voted in a mayor who is bending to Trump's will. like and
Mhm.
bending before Trump even comes around. And then the governor's like, we're taking over the police department. And it's like, and they're not, it's like, it's just like completely out of control. So it's like there's a social kind of cacophony along with this like other, like this natural cacophony that kind of happened with, with no one else's. Like you can't change that. You can't change the tornado. So it's just all this change, 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 and change. And I feel like with the E40 as a reference, it's like he doesn't like the sound changes a little bit, but the sound don't change all the time. The sound like the sound is like E40 sound is E40 sound. Like you can't you're not gonna deny it and you're not gonna forget it. And so just kind of creating this equation for these disparate things that have like textual textural similarities in the way in which they can kind of uproot or change your life. I thought it was like great to put those things together, and it's
I thought
sad to put those things together.
it is. It is. It's. I feel like the when I think about E40, there's two things. I was listening to an interview with him recently, and when he was talking about like how he came into music, how he got into music, one phrase that he uses is narrating the soil. And I was like, that could, I mean, Khalil could say that. Like it felt incredibly akin to how you work and process. And also, I mean, for all the dark things that might happen in those lyrics, there's also like a goofiness and a lightness. There's an ability to access joy, humor, as well as all these other registers of feeling, which I've always felt in your work. Like there is a cacophony of voices, but it feels very, I don't know, when I go into an exhibition of yours, I don't feel like I'm going to be overwhelmed by emotions that I can't control. When I see them, I see a lot of things and it gives me a lot of time to process. And it might be the way that like things are kind of contained, but there's such a breadth of emotion and feeling, but it just, you still have the time to kind of process. And it's, I don't know. It's like it's a difficult thing to do. It's a difficult thing to be able to pull off, to have so many voices and so many things happening in the work, and yet still allow for that like air to breathe. When I'm
Yeah, yeah, no,
looking
I
at this
yeah.
particular show, uh, I wanted to see there's like you've always had a relationship to ground, um, and you've always had a relationship to sky. And I wanted to see, like, especially, this is maybe the first time I'm seeing works on canvas in this particular format. Um, I wanted to see what your relationship to Sky was for this time around.
This time around, the sky is kind of like this. The painting is, historically thinking as a window, as a view space. It's kind of a frame within a frame within a frame within a frame, and all these paintings are made in silkscreen. And the sky in this work, all the works in this show, all kind of it's like sky and screen.
Mhm.
Everything is like it's like we're now out like in this presentation it's outside of the positionality of the audience being in the gallery as if it's there in an environment. Like my last show at Calicut Fine Arts called Black Ice, it featured a 8 by 14 foot ceramic sculpture that laid close near the floor, and then there was a 3.5 foot collage of the clouds on the pillar in the middle of the room, and so it set a kind of it allowed the viewer to be in the room as if they were in a world that was just set in fragments, like you saw two fragments. This exhibition, it's like really playing on the strainer bars or the stretcher bars of the canvas, of the rep canvas, being akin to the phone, akin to the computer, akin to the television, and these new digital billboards that you see on the highway or in Times Square that are like in motion, which is also kind of crazy.
Yeah, I know that when you make a show, it's like, of course, you have your practice and how you move within it. but you're also always responding to the space that you're working with. Were there specific things about this space that really like locked in the show in a particular way?
Yeah, I started the show thinking about the large 21 foot painting. Initially, it wasn't 21 feet. It was originally 14 feet. It was just two parts. And then we were quite far down the process, I brought two of those two panels home, and I thought I could pinned them up in my studio, and I was like, let's get that other panel out the closet, and then we got to make it 21 feet. And I felt really excited with that because that wall in the gallery is 38 feet 8 inches. And I thought that that
Uh,
was a much better proportion to fit on a wall. The 21 feet is a much better proportion to fit on that wall than 14 feet. I think the show would actually be it would be very thin. I think the show would be very thin if that work wasn't that large.
hmm, interesting.
So, yeah, I make models. I like making models. So the show's
Uh,
it's we started with that collage, and then I built a model immediately, and so kind of placing things inside kind of set the tone of the physical space.
do you always work with physical models or do you do like the SketchUp version?
I'm not good with digital technology, honestly. I'm not even gonna lie. Like I would rather live in a world with no AI, honestly. Like I don't want AI. I don't want ChatGPT. I don't like I think there are people who have skills, and we can lean on those skills, and there are other people who have like weaknesses, and like people should be okay with that, like being okay with not having uh I won't say weaknesses, but like I'll just say being like you don't need to have to be able to do everything, and we don't need technology to fill in every gap for us to be able to do everything. Like we're not super people. So yeah, I like that's one thing I'm trying to keep consistent in my studio. It's just let's just make a model, let's just make some miniatures, let's just slow down a little bit, and then we can really kind of um, see space differently.
This is a good detail. When I saw this detail, I looked up the skit again because I remember having watched it, and I just wanted to. What was your first feelings when you watched that skit? So this says 12 Years a Slave auditions for Saturday Night Live. I think it was the guy from The Big Bang Theory was the host, and basically it's like Steve McQueen interviewing white people to be the role of like slave driver, and they're unbelievably uncomfortable about like saying any of the things that's on the script.
The first two panels of that large painting were actually a part of the large collage, the large sky collage that I presented at the Museum of Modern Art in 2021, 2022. So it's been interesting to revisit this collage and like render it in a whole new material because the surface has a different quality than the photo text in which the original work was printed on. And so some of the things I had to revisit, some things I didn't have to necessarily revisit, like the QR code in the show is to an article in The Guardian about why white people use lynching to control and terrorize black people from 2018. And
Mhm.
so, like, when I think about the collage and the parts of it, it's like a vestigial organ of my practice that continues to kind of live without a role. It lives and populates like almost as if it's like my brain. It's a folder. It's a digital folder. Um, but a vestigial organ is an organ that's not working. But it's hard to necessarily. I feel like the collage itself is not necessarily working, but the content within it is understood. It like you can visit it or you can try to decipher it or you can kind of engage it. Um, Most of my
Do you,
digital collages are made in moment. So like to think about like to ask me how did it feel when you watched that video of the Saturday Night Live? I have to kind of cull through my brain back to summer 2021 when I was working on that show to think about how I felt, and it's
I
been
see.
4 years. And I think, and that's why when it was described about how the work is living in the present, but thinking about a past, it's like that in that moment to recall. I think is a connection to that kind of simultaneous present past issue. Like in when we thinking about memory, it like becomes you like have to you could kind of call back the feeling in the current moment that you once had, but then you have to watch it again, and but then that's a new feeling. It may mirror a
Mhm.
previous one, but it becomes new because you're now new in this moment and where you are in your life in that moment. So, I mean, I remember I laughed. I think in a moment when I watched that and I was making a collage and I decided to reference that collage or I referenced that video. I think in the original collage in 2021, there's a screenshot of the television show or that skit, and then I made a version of this collage and I redacted uh, 80% of it,
Oh, wow.
and it was all almost all black. And then that's where, when I redacted it, that's when the sky moved in. So I had this almost completely black field that was framed by other information on the edges. That's when the sky kind of burst through that and became something else. And now
So
that collage is going even further and becoming a painting.
when you think about this, the way that you collage on a surface like this versus the way that you collage in the sculptures themselves, it sounds like it's almost coming from two different places, even though to a viewer, they feel very married in a lot of different ways. The materiality is obviously very different, but like
Yes.
I'm curious, like how does uh, is it kind of the permanence of ceramic that shifts that experience for you, or how does that feel?
Oh, I think we agree on the processes. Someone I've been talking to a lot over the last couple of weeks, and these processes are both additive.
Uh-huh.
And I have been able to arrive when I like coming to silkscreen has been a really beautiful way to engage a kind of additive process that also is a flat process.
I
It's
see.
also it doesn't have any impediment. It like it lays there. If you put white and then you put the color on top or you put the photograph on top, it lays there. There's no editing. Like this oil-based ink is like pretty thick and like complicated and it dries very fast. And the ceramics, like you have to put the decal on it and then you have to put it in the kiln and I mean, in terms of ceramics, it's kind of fast, but you fire it really quickly for an hour or an hour and a half, going to 1,380 degrees, and it's just like sitting there and it burns, and then it goes into the glaze, and you bring it out, and you know, it may or may not look exactly the way you like it. For the most part, it does look the way you like it, and so that is akin to the silkscreen. I really appreciate being able to use the silkscreen because it's making it's making me think about collaging differently.
Is I've never thought about that connection. It's actually really interesting to think about. I wonder, is there also a level of preparation in both to set it up appropriately? Because there is no real editing. It does lay on top, but like for instance, in ceramics, like there's certain glazes that can go on top of one another, but certain glazes that can't go on top of one another. And I
Yes.
imagine that in the silk screening process, there are ways that you have to kind of understand, like, okay, the color has to be built a certain way. Does that also feel akin to the like to those two experiences?
Um, I think the only in the printmaking, you just need to make sure there's white behind it. You need
Ah,
if you're putting a nice color, like if you want something to be solid red or solid orange, or like if you go into the gallery, or maybe we have a close-up shot of this in the slides. There's an O and an X side by side, and they're orange. When you see it in the painting, the O is a slightly darker than the X because the X has white behind it.
oh, interesting.
And so that slight shift, um, yeah, and you can kind of see the difference in this photograph.
Yeah.
Just paying attention to that is really important. But in terms of anything other than that, the other amazing thing about using this silkscreen that has been revealed to me is that it loses information similarly to the decals.
Hmm.
the digitalization of the photograph being printed on film, then being exposed in the screen, and depending on what kind of screen you use, there is loss. And I love that inherent possibility of loss um, between both processes. One is a very digitally losing one that's like you can't really control it in the screen. I mean, you could keep washing screens out over and over and over, and you just like kind of go crazy trying to get the perfect print. But thankfully, the process is so forgiving to me. Like the way in which I like to work, that like I don't like this one, but I like this one. And if you just make that slight shift, I'm satisfied. But in terms of like replicating this painting directly from the image that I made in the computer, they are not one to one. But I love that it becomes textural
Right.
or textual.
Is it almost feels like that loss in translation, it becomes a vehicle for abstraction too.
Yes. And it's like really amazing that abstraction can be used in this moment where it's like so many times we think of abstract people talk about abstraction when you're making art like this. And it's like, but like when what I learned about abstraction in school is actually the construction and deconstruction of something that is recognizable being turned anew. And that's why one of the biggest references of thinking about this show is Warhol's electric chair in pink and orange.
Oof. Such a good, the electric chairs are just the best.
And how those colors sit, how the image sits. And I remember in graduate school, one of my classmates was charged with presenting an electric chair with with Bubbles by Jeff Koons in
Hmm.
ceramic, and thinking about those two works juxtaposed against each other. And we had to do a critical analysis and a formal analysis of both of those things together. And that that has stuck with me for 10 years.
Wow. Do you see both of those works kind of finding their way into this, or does it feel like Warhol was really the jumping off point?
I don't see them as like in this show necessarily, but I see them in my mindscape
Yeah.
of making art. And when I think about the historicization of art and artworks that make impact,
Hmm.
I'm not necessarily thinking I'm making any impact, but just thinking about who are my predecessors and what did they do, and how am I in conversation, adding or rejecting or contradicting or opposing the thesis that they're making in those works.
Something that I feel like on the one hand, you're like a very uh you're like a respectful, thoughtful student in the sense that like you really honor your teachers, you honor your mentors, the people that came before you. And then I also know that a lot of what you learned about contemporary art came from YouTube and that you're an autodidact and that you just kind of do your own thing too. Like, how do you balance those two worlds of trusting yourself and like that intuition as well as honoring your mentors and teachers?
That's a great question. I I think I like for me, I always feel like I have to remember to ask the question. And when I ask the question, sitting long enough to be able to hear the answer. And the answer may not reveal itself to me for a while. And a question, I might live with a question that I have to keep living with for, like you have a question, but keep asking you. It'll keep asking you. It'll keep asking you. And so you don't really have a choice but to keep hearing it and keep hearing it and keep hearing it. And how do you I think it's a bit of a balance because the practice is all developed intuitively. Like everything I do is intuitive. Like in school, my professor in undergrad, she was like, "You need to add some personal narrative to this work. It needs to have some personal in there, and I'm like not really interested in necessarily sharing my personal because it's like I have to then expose myself. I have to expose my pain. I have to expose my heart to people who wouldn't necessarily, at the time, I don't think my classmates, like they weren't necessarily in a position to talk to somebody who's making art about their dead mother.
Mhm.
And how do you make art about having a dead mother? It's like it's almost impossible to make art about like out of it's like that's like an abstraction. You want to start talking about death. That's like one of the pinnacles of abstraction, like that we as the living people have to live knowing that people who were once here with us are gone. It's a mind fuck. And so uh, the balance between like and then so developing this practice being intuitively engaging with references and historical experiential opportunities and learning from older people and asking questions and waiting for the answers to be like to hear the response from those questions that were asked. I think the combination of those things were built out of self-preservation.
Mhm. Over time, you've done quite a number of solo exhibitions, and you've had a pretty substantial career already. Has it felt like you've been able to peel back some things for yourself? Like to me, there's always a certain level of vulnerability in this work. I think there is a lot of the personal, but I just think the way that it gets, there's always a filter. Like there's always a way in which it's becoming abstracted or torn apart and placed back together so that it becomes a kind of three-dimensional concrete poetry, and that allows you to take a step back. But in in this growing process and archive of what you've made, do you sense your subject position at the same distance, or have you gotten, let's say, how do I want to put this? Is there greater vulnerabilities, or does it feel like its vulnerability isn't even the right question?
That's interesting. I so like my first show in 2017 in New York City was about trying to think about ceramic history, connecting it from historical acts of violence to contemporary acts of violence, thinking about the 18th century beginning of German appropriative ceramic manufacturing to contemporary, like someone being murdered by a police officer in St. Louis in 2014. And then I had made things in my studio in 2014. I collected newspaper clippings in 2017. And then I made these sculptures in 2017 that were presented in New York City, thinking about 3 years prior with objects and with content, and then colliding them with these new sculptures that had hobby decals on them and or like I should say, mimicry decals that look like Meissen decals, but they're really not. And
Mhm.
then still dealing with the street, dealing with the newspaper. And I don't know if I really got to how I don't think I actually dealt with how I felt about the situation in 2014, even though I made sculptures in 2017, kind of dissecting, like trying to open that book.
Right.
And then my next show was a similar tangent to that at Wesleyan University, where it was like, okay, in 2017, Jason Stockley was acquitted of murder after on he was on television saying he was in his car, his police car, saying, "I'm gonna kill this expletive." So then the next show is like trying to like open that book up again. But then it's like, then I'm making reference to the sky, then I'm making reference to the asphalt, then I'm thinking about my grandfather serving in the service, and then my father serving in the Navy, and then thinking about all the patrilineage that I have, and is where do they rest and where are they? And so it's like so many things start folding and unfolding and unfolding. Hmm. Like I feel like I listened to Kerry James. I listened to an article being read to me by it was like Kerry James Marshall's last feature in the New York magazine or New Yorker magazine or something. And he's like, I don't leave the studio. I don't have enough time to do all the things that I want to do. And when I think about myself, like I'm always like people, I mean, there are a lot of people listening to this that I know, and I can't see all you all because I'm on my phone. I can't see the list, so I'm like also trying to like figure out how much I want to just like expose and give and like not give. And so, yes, that is a moment of engaging with paying attention to vulnerability. But it's like, I don't know. I don't think yeah, when I was younger, I think I would live to be 33.
Wow.
And a lot of people around me in St. Louis and in other cities, they ain't living to be 33.
Mhm.
I mean, look at Popel. Popel and Kerry James Marshall are the same age. I was talking to somebody else. I was talking to Bob Rennie. Bob Rennie, Kerry James Marshall, and Popel are all the same age. And I think like they live through life with such long relationships. Like I just like, someone told me recently, I told them my dream and they said, I understand that that's your dream, but I have an even bigger dream for you. Like I hope you get that and more.
Mhm.
I didn't like I'm so present in myself with my shit that I'm not even like thinking that there's even more for me. How, when I think about vulnerability for the work, it's like there's definitely a balance. Like I think there is, like I think it still is a self-preservation because how does the thing live without me here and still be able to hold space for multiple things to for multiple people to get access to the content at the same time? Because if I completely made a self-portrait of myself, I don't know if I would be able to necessarily, I don't know if I could sit there so boldly um, in myself to give the audience a portrait of myself in such a way.
I mean, to me, this is your there is the activity of self-portraiture here in as much as every single show we understand your filtration system more. We understand how things come together and how you formulate things because we are seeing the world we live in recomposed in all of these sculptures. We're seeing bits and pieces that we understand, some people more than others, some people less than others, and that gives us an opportunity to say, oh, this is Khalil's vision of the world. And there's something kind of almost funereal about the way that these pieces exist. Like they are this kind of compressed archaeology, um, where it's not like they're inherently sad or anything, but there is something about death and abstraction that still weigh heavy on them.
Yeah, and I think ever since I made the first series of these sculptures, there's always been a darkness. And someone asked me a while ago, well, now that you take antidepressants, do you think that'll affect the darkness in the work? Do you think it'll affect your work in any way? And I don't know. I don't know. There's still so many things that I do want to talk about. There's so many things that I am interested in engaging in terms of like the sculpture specifically, in terms of historical objects, in terms of material capability and mimicry with using ceramics to evolve into a whole new kind of function or use. I have a series of street works that look like making ceramic tiles look like asphalt, but then they also look like stars at the same time. And these
Hmm.
are trying to make new of these Antioch mosaics, ancient Roman mosaics that I've seen at the Baltimore Museum of Art for the first time. And so using ceramic to constantly like I'm trying to constantly invent and reinvent how ceramics can be used and let people know that it's like when I was in college, my professor told me you can make ceramics be a pot, you can make it look like something from life, and ceramic can look like a rock. And it's like for me in the sculptures, I'm trying to do all three of those things at the same time. So now, and then another person asked me, well, why don't you make works for the wall? And I'm like, I haven't figured out how to use the ceramic to look like something that would be in the position of the wall. So I don't know yet. I can't make wall works yet because I haven't made brick. I haven't figured out how to make clay in my studio, make sculptures in my studio look like a brick wall. And so I'm like, okay, how do I balance? How do I keep balancing that? How much room do I have for play, and how much room do I have for invention? And I think
Speaking
that
of,
comes into the vulnerability too.
yeah, I think so. Speaking of those particular asphalt tile pieces, I thought it was fascinating that like even the manufacturing of those pieces was an important part of it, that they were manufactured by the American Olean Tile Company, which was a unionized factory in Western New York, and now largely that's all made in Mexico. And it even that became an important part of how you were thinking about sort of white consumption and larger systems that were at play to create this sort of sky ground.
Yeah, those works. Yeah, those four tiles in that show, Black Eye said Calicoon, sat in the back of the room. Um, and the floor tiles, the floor sculptures I make in the studio,
Oh, okay, got
pressing
it.
them, the white commercial tiles with the decals on them in the back corner, those are the American Olean
Gotcha.
ceramic. Yeah, and I mean, and it's like, and also thinking about how to use found object is also something that's constantly um, being wrestled with as well, because like that's a very important social issue and
Yeah.
cultural fragment that needs to be remembered. But then, how do I also frame it and make it a sculpture with nice edges?
I
Like
mean,
formally they still need to be, I don't want them like they have the grout bump out so that when you affix the tile and you want to mortar them, so it's like I'm like I need to find some of those tiles and like slice them on the masonry saw so they get the nice sharp edges instead of like having the bump out.
it was something that I it was pretty notable in your materials list that it says everything, and then at the very end of each one it says no, parenthetically, no found objects. I like, what about highlighting the fact that there, like, this is all generated? Or yeah, before I speak to it, I'm curious, like, why did you have to, why did you feel like you wanted to include that?
I'm tired of people asking. Like,
That's
how do
a
you
good
like
answer.
glue all these things together? How do you get this? And I'm like, there ain't no way. Like, it's not possible. I mean, like, if we look back at Gordon Matta Clark's sculptures where he formed the glass in the kiln in the basement of the restaurant, and then there are these large chunk works that are partially melted, partially not melted, and they have fragments of all different stuff in them. And when we look at those, when we look at Dieter Roth's um, books where he walked the streets and collected all the stuff and then put them in the books and then put them in the gallery for you to be able to open them up and look through them. Like the frame by which things come together. It's like you have to either find a frame that works perfect or you have to make a frame that
Mhm.
works. And it has to sometimes those frames um, those frames don't always allow for legibility in the correct way. Like you don't necessarily know that Dieter Roth walked the streets to collect all that shit to make it available for you to see it. Because it's presented to you in a frame of these books with all these sheets in them, and then all you do is see stuff. Like
Uh-huh.
even our friend who just had the beautiful show at the Judd Foundation, Ugi
Ichi.
Akamatsu,
That's who
like
I was
those
thinking of.
works. Yeah, like you don't know he's walking through the street to make these compositions. You don't even know he fucking smoked the cigarettes. But I heard he don't smoke cigarettes anymore. He just buy the cigarettes to give the cigarettes away, but so that he can have the plastic sleeve to keep making his sculptures.
I
But
can't
we
believe
don't.
you're telling on him right now.
Well, I think he said that in the talk, so I don't. I'm not exposing him. That was just exposed to me. So when I think about communicating that there are no found objects, I think that was just like the first way it came to my mind when we
Hmm.
were when we were completing the image list. But I think I have considered saying all fabricated by artists. To communicate, like it's not like I am using industrial materials and technologies in a non-industrial environment.
Right,
I mean,
right.
my studio is 13,000 square feet in St. Louis, and I have four kilns,
Oh my
and
God. Wow.
I have quite a bit of stuff going on in there, and I could say, all fabricated by artists, and it would kind of perpetuate this kind of industrial engagement. But saying no found objects kind of continues this like communication and dialogue with artists. Like I'm like that's my counter to Ed and Nancy Keenholz.
In what way?
Like they are using almost all found objects to make their
I see,
work.
I see.
Like you can't arrive at some of the things that they've made without things being found. Like you have to take a boar. Like they have a boar in one of their sculptures. You
Right.
have to literally find taxidermy and bring it to the room. You know,
Hmm.
or like you get like the what is the work that was in Venice or in Milan that was in Documenta in 1978, the five-car stud. They had to go
Hmm.
find a car and put the car in there. Like they could fabricate the people, but they had to find the clothes or find the material to make the clothes that would be addressing the forms of the kind of gnarly beings that they had in the installation. Because I'm not, yeah, because people want to make me be in conversation with certain artists that do make assemblage, which I don't mind, um, but also to just be clear. I want to
Right.
be as clear as possible.
So in that way, like I was thinking about someone like Vincent Fecteau. Is that a
Yes.
person that doesn't actually like, does that not register as someone that you would necessarily be in conversation with? Or because there is it's all made, but then there are moments of images also being transplanted into it. It felt like there's a relationship there.
Oh yeah, that's an artist that's like I feel like he and I are like I am like a formal and material spawn.
Yeah, I would love to see something happen there. I think I don't know, the way he's thinking about form abstraction and how that's still completely relevant to the lived experience feels entirely related to how you're operating. But to go back to, there's a couple things that have come up that also tell me about the entrepreneurial aspect of the artist. And like that's also another reason why I felt like E40 was a good person to like highlight. It's not just the artist as, creative, whatever, like the person who like the artist as the person who makes art, but also the person who like creates the right conditions and creates like their own way of acting with autonomy. And I think, you've always been very specific about how you wanted to participate and what you want to participate in. And yeah, like was that instilled in you through mentors? Was that like knowing how you wanted to handle your business? That feels specific to you in a way.
I mean, honestly, a lot of it is just working and engaging and participating in so many predominantly white environments that
Hmm.
Like I had to think of a process in the studio that was mine, and then I had to think about the ways in which I work with materials that, like that had a kind of autonomy or agency that felt akin to what was important to me, and then in terms of like, I'm just gonna be completely honest. I'm just really fucking practical.
Yeah.
I'm really practical, and I think a lot of like I'm not necessarily chasing an idea of what my studio should be or how my studio should be, but I am chasing just keeping a studio.
But the thing that interests me is that uh, I think a lot of artists hope to be in a place where they can understand the practicalities, but they're often clouded by the myths of you're supposed to do and how you're supposed to be an artist. And like they're never told owning means this for you. And like in a sense, there's been such a mythology of like I know I grew up like me growing up in this particular art world. There's almost a sense of like too much success or too much of one thing or another, or owning is like being a sellout of some kind until you start seeing like, oh, well, actually, how do you survive unless actually have something that's yours?
Yeah, I think yeah. Well, okay, in a direct way, in that way, my friend, she's my family friend. She's been a mentor. She's like an aunt. She told me when in 2018, after my first show at Calhoun, and I come back from doing a residency in Hungary, and we had some pieces for my show at Wesleyan University for sale, and made a little bit more money. And she was like, you know, I was like, man, I really want to move to New York because I was living in rural New York State, 6.5 hours away from here, and I was like, I really want to move to New York City. I really want to be around other people. I really want to be around people who are interested and invested in the ways in which I'm invested and interested in it. And she was like, no, what you need to do with that bit of money is you need to buy a place in St. Louis. She was like, you need to buy a house in St. Louis and you need to just keep it so that you always have somewhere to go.
That's that's some great fucking advice.
And then in 2020, I lived and worked in rural New York, and then I moved to New York City after my first year because it was just too debilitating to live in such a rural environment. Uh, I lived in New York for a few months, and then the pandemic began, and I need to move home to take care of my grandmother. And so
Mhm.
then in 2020, that building that I bought in 2018, that was uh, you know, it was this place that my mentor told me I needed to get because I always needed a place to go. It was time for me to live in this place that I was told that I would need one day. And
That's
so
amazing.
the, and so then when I moved home, I bought my studio, and it was buying my studio was a big deal because it's taken so much investment. I probably have spent as much money as the money that I spent. Like the price that I paid for the building is the amount of money that I've also spent on updating parts of it.
Right. Yeah, that's anytime there's like a renovation project, everybody tells you it's always like 30% more than you think it's going to be.
Oh yeah. And this is like tremendously higher, which is crazy. But that's because that's because it's like it's a big responsibility.
Yeah, it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work. I feel that. I want to, before I can see that we're starting to get close to the end here. Um, it's funny to me that you said before that you are not interested, like if you could leave out all the digital and you don't want AI, you don't want any of those things, but you're not a Luddite either. You know, even your titles are completely informed by a different, like a language that only came into existence upon the digital. There's a poetry that you acknowledge and that you mine, um, that's a person who lives in a world in which you move in space and understand the social violence of that. And you move in a digital space and you understand the social violence in that. And like that, it makes me wonder how you think about compression in a number of different ways, because there's compression in the sculptures, there's compression in your titles. How does that all come together for you?
Oh,
I feel like I just gave you a headache.
no. I think like when I think about the compression, like I guess I just need to do it by reading one of the titles. One of the large sculptures in the gallery, not the largest one, but one of the large ones is overturned middle underscore still bell. It's like a vertical line. Digital is in orange, and then fruit is in all these different colors. It's like in five different colors. And like brackets, no ring, comma, the method with a vertical line, 2055 moto, close brackets, underlined, close the bracket, and it says getthefuckon.com. And like the fracturing of the way that the formatting sets up the language, and then the way in which you move around the geometries of the sculptures and the zooms ins and the zooms outs with the silver vessel that's upside down, and then the vessel, the kind of bowl that has like a silver interior. Hmm. It has come together, and it exists in such a kind of physical way that I needed in 2017 when I first started making these things. It was like I had to get it. I had to make I had to put language together that was able to hold all of these things together at the same time. And I don't know, um, I didn't know how to get there. And the first time it was they were a little clunky. And now they're starting to get a little bit more like they're still clunky, but they're getting a lot. They're a lot more forceful. Like I feel like there's a lot more veracity to the language, and I don't know if the compression is ever gonna if the compression will ever go away, or if the compression will get any better, or if it'll get lighter, or if it'll get looser. I have no way in which to truly kind of get through that, but I'm I'm accepting it. I accept the the compression.
It feels more like feature than flaw.
Right.
It's, I think in finding our way through these sculptures and titles and paintings, that compression is what makes it also so rewarding. That there's so much to dig through, and that there's nothing that's not like uh precisely like compressed. Like that there's you don't make it easy on people. Like the fact that a checklist has to have, six different colors and all this stuff, or even just like captions in a digital space. Like a lot of it's not easy to make those captions. So on the one hand, I think it's honoring the specific kind of poetry you're trying to make. Uh, and on the other, I think it's also resistance. I think there's something in that that's consistently saying, this is how I want to take up space. And I really appreciate that. I think that is always going to be a feature.
Thank you. I really appreciate it because it's still in that it's still in that place of trying to have autonomy and agency. I'm sorry, I'm getting a little distracted because I'm trying to find the Simone White poem that I would like to read. She says she just sent it. Okay, good. It's here. It's here. Okay, great. Um,
Do we do questions before, or I just wanted to check in before? I want to make sure you have your closing.
oh yeah, and I just wanted to make sure that I have it
Oh, okay.
before we even get there. But yeah, I'm ready for questions.
Thank you both so much. That was such a wonderful conversation. The first question is from Whitney. It is about titles, which you guys started talking about a little bit, but Whitney asks, the complexity of your titles suggests they function almost as textual collages. How do you think about the relationship between text and object? And in what ways do titles activate or destabilize the reading of your work?
Mm. I mean, I think it's all there. I think all that is all right there. The poet, the title started because the first gallery I worked with in New York was called Calicoon Fine Arts, and I made friends with an artist named James Hoff, who runs a publishing company called Primary Information, and at that around that time it was they had recently published a book of women and country poetry, and 59 to 79, I think it was the title, and I was like, this is really amazing, thinking about people using a typewriter to create sculpture on a page. Never seen it before. So I was like, let's try our hand at that, and let's add to that dialogue. Um, they are meant to be word sculptures when read. They are supposed to call to music in a lot of ways. The sound is the noises of the titles that you make when you read them is even in your own brain, they are supposed to call. They're supposed to call to the sonic. You know, so much of the music. I think that is so much spirit. Like when I think about spiritual music, it's not like some people think that it's just like some people really enjoy the sonic music that or the spiritual music um that has no words. You know, it goes beyond words. It's like you're hearing, sounds, and like it's like vibrating in your physical in a different way. And I think the way that the way that the text, like the way I'm desiring that the text is to be read and experienced is through that same way, but with the audible, and the concrete poetry from the last century. You're looking at form on paper that's not necessarily doing the sonic, but it's doing a visual representation of what the sonic could do on paper at that time with the tools and technologies available.
Thank you for that question, Whitney, and that answer, Khalil. The next question is from Buzz Spector, and Buzz asks, I appreciate your pointing out your studio practicality, which puts your research into histories of clay into closer proximity with useful things fashioned from clay. Ground in your art is about this closeness. Sky is about abstracted, a zone where what's dead and what's sublime can be approached. Can you speak to the differences in handling clay and seeing sky?
Hmm. Thank you for that question, Buzz. Yeah, I think when I'm handling the material, I kind of go into a zone, and the sky is definitely a zone. Like when you lay down on the ground to look up at the sky and zone out, like it's just that like zoning out. Yeah, the sky is an environment or is an entity that we could calculate the limits of it, but we won't be able to inhabit its limit. when making, we don't necessarily we get to inhabit that space of making for a few moments while we're doing it, but we come out of it and we have to go out into the world and do other things. And I think the like engaging this guy as a part of the work is like trying to keep having space to keep getting to that moment, those moments of memorial and remembering some of those people that I think about often, and that it doesn't necessarily come to me when I'm in those moments of making or handling clay, because then also sometimes handling the clay is mechanical or rigid or um, it's a kind of a regimen, whereas dealing with the sky and like having the space to reflect is less of a regimen.
Thank you for that answer, Khalil. The next question is from Jeremy. And Jeremy says, Khalil, could you please speak on how your understanding and relationship to practicality has changed over the history of your studio practice?
Hmm. Oh, that's interesting. I wonder, sometimes when you go to a lecture or a conversation and there are other people in the room that now you know that are in the room, they might be able to answer that question better than you may be able to answer that question. For myself, I don't know if it's, I don't know if it's ever, I don't know if it has changed. I think when I was graduating from undergrad, I wanted to take materials that I had kind of put together from studio to St. Louis. When I graduated from graduate school, I used my fellowship time all the way up until like I started in August, and I was like, please let me finish in August. So after graduation, I had 2.5 months I could still work in the studio. Um, when I was recently asked to be a visitor at the University of Arkansas in Fayetteville, I had made 21 sculptures in my time there, and these seven sculptures or six sculptures in the exhibition at Canada are the remainder of the 21 sculptures that I made in Arkansas in 2023. So the timeline of these works is 23 to 25. Um, so I feel like I'm trying to wring as much out of that practicality as possible, because it's like you gotta hustle. This is a hustle. And when I mean a hustle, it's like I'm not trying to pull wool over anybody's eyes, but it is something to navigate consistently, navigate and re-navigate. But I think, I think practicality is more a habit than anything.
Thank you. And we have one last question from an anonymous audience member. And they're asking, how did Canada as an artist-run, artist-driven exhibition space influence how you approach this exhibition, if at all differently from other shows you've had at other institutions?
Hmm.
It's a good question.
I worked with Canada in 2022 to curate an exhibition mostly of artists, women artists that make sculpture. I met the staff at Canada in I met the staff at Canada and the owners at Canada in 2019, right before the pandemic. And I drove some works of theirs to Chicago for an exhibition that was at a record label during the Chicago Expo Fair and the one and only NADA Fair at the Chicago Athletic Center that occurred that fall. And so when I think about my relationship with the gallery, it has been supportive of me in the myriad of ways in which my hustle needs to live. My livelihood. Like they supported me when I needed some money, they paid me a couple grants for drive their work to Chicago, and that was a support. They thought that I had vision to be able to put together an exhibition of things that were important to me, and those women artists, those sculptures got to live through the summer of 2022 in their space. And when Sarah offered me to do a show at the gallery in May, I was like, okay, let's like they move some shit around for me, they make it possible for me to do things for other people and for myself and for them. So now it's like, okay, let's make this show and make it the best show that it can be and take risks in the show and make something um, that honors that kind of collegiality and that support and that those relationships. So I think as a gallery that's working and owned and operated by a completely artist driven staff, it's like it's one of a only few set of places. And you try to, you give and put your best foot forward. It's like someone the other day asked me, "Do you notice galleries? How do you convince them to give you a show?" And I was like, wait a second, you don't convince a damn person to do a damn thing, like you gotta let them do what they doing, and if they don't vibe with the work, you gotta find other opportunities. And when I think about this opportunity, like I ain't gotta convince anybody of anything, but I appreciate being in conversation and working with a group of people that see and care about what I'm doing, you know, at a similar level of how I care about what I'm doing. And they're coming from a perspective of an experience in the world as artists that are similar to what I'm doing. And like also the Brooklyn Rail, an institution and organization that is carrying and committing to the legacy and history of communicating this thing that we're all somewhere akin to. So I think it has a major effect on how, like, because I've had traumatizing experience with galleries and museums, and this experience is like help making room for me to also work through that trauma and that pain that I've faced with other experiences that I've had, directly and indirectly.
Thank you so much, Khalil, and thank you, Ajay. I know you wanted to close out with a reading, Khalil. I'll give you a chance to introduce that.
Thank you. Um, Simone White is a poet, a professor, a colleague, a friend, a mother, an amazing artist, and someone who is so important to what I do as an artist. Being able to oscillate between so many spaces and make and write word that is so connected to what it feels like to be living Black in America right now. The poem that Simone has shared with us is called The Politics of Heartbreak. It's a part of a longer essay that she's written, and it has previously been published by the Brooklyn Rail. The Politics of Heartbreak. Do you know what the message of Western civilization is? I am alone, Eileen Miles. We feel lost, Robertson. You can't be wicked anymore because the internet has devoured everything once known as bad. Bad feelings like disgust, desire to disappear or die, or to die out into nothing in which one is suspended, or to kill her with some bitch be gone, end up frozen for an unknown period of time, thinking mostly about things you want. Issei Miyake, please, please. You freeze up a wrong, bad action to take. Unclenching long enough to be mean as a snake at scale. You intend to possess yourself and be at level of the organism's means of expression. To fight, it is bad to fight. to get the possibility of catastrophic violence entirely off you, the very definition of discourtesy, disabling a whole assumption, the Black Angel t shirt from Denim Tears. Maybe outside that desire, rightly called atmosphere conditions. Oh, to be cruel and impossible in dialogue. YSL Woody embodies the incredible lameness of the upstate lifestyle. The Margiela tabby and other items that can actually be worn suggest the value of personal elegance, possibly the only equivalent of encountering total chaos that we have in our galactical spot. Gucci suiting addresses my hunger for certain powerful geometries of the male physique taste, such as a kind of galaxy on Orion's belt. Jamaica Kincaid's Instagram is the truth. Kamala, Kamala, we love you. Ben's poem, where the balaclava, fashion, and genocide have to get together, speaking at once to where I come from and where I am coming from, concentrates. The question, who could be led by these Obamas? In parentheses, no matter how LeBron James might suggest a model of gentle redistribution and physical integrity, long life, close parentheses. How does Pharrell figure into all of this? As a piece of the developing, not atmosphere, not storm, like blind, we are in the thing like a blind curve, the kettle black, what we are held inside and are inside, our inside, invisible from Paris or Martha's Vineyard, the non place. LV, 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 real as Los Angeles, where the desert erupts. At the rate of the impossible, forest, trees, and ocean, the whales, island places, Douglas went. Have you been? Have you been? Have you been? Sao Paulo, Berlin, Rome, Cape Town, Venice, assholes. Our principal sorrow beginning again, small. We shall be made a story that cannot be assessed. Places. Phoebe Philo, pants, wee, can be no longer or ever go. An aspirant congregation modeled on futurism worse than spent, disenchanted. Now to a dead man, 20 years of 80-degree Novembers wear you down. Dad. Thug came out, but so tragically or effectively banned from Fulton County. Unable to speak with his family like ours lit alive, but in California, so we cannot see or call them to us when we are threatened. Which is often, Dad, a lot exactly the threats you said. Having no money that is investing in beauty. Oh, I encountered this as a description of what I believe. But it's entirely wrong. Insofar as you were correct in being a soldier isn't for the national interest, but a biological willingness to drop into the present occlusion. Letting it happen, letting Isaac see how he thinks we are possessions, how everything except we, kicking and screaming, affirms this for his imagination. When you did not answer last week when I asked into the wind, look, Dad, I am tired. Isaac is losing strength. It was an answer. It was. It is only going to get harder, like you said when I was 10, your rotten arm in a sling. Doing the driving with your left hand. I am sure you did not mean to leave us alone like this. Preparation or having some knowledge of what could befall the trusting black woman and her children, failing to take adequate notice of the delight they will take in fucking up your making a calculation. Because, Dad, it is on the left It is the gift of calculating and your dead whispering that come to depend not on beauty so obviously for cheap. My mother's complex brownness and social security checks also, as the ends do not be meeting. Despite my growing powers, Dad, never like yours, somewhat restrained by occasional bouts of fear that he will actually do something that breaks a cell in one of us that we cannot come back from. The lovers we do not trust, not in the way they think, although we come in with trust, an absolute which does not know judgment and only watches to see what the lover will do, a wager inevitably lost. Black love sweats my abilities, and yet I turn to you, tricky God of the Black survivor.
Thank you so much, Khalil. That was so beautiful and such a great way to close us off. Thank you, Khalil. Thank you, Ajay, for such a wonderful conversation today. Thank you, Annette from Canada, for your support and preparing for today's event. We'd also like to thank the Terra Foundation for American Art and Tiger Foundation for sponsoring our NSC program and making these daily conversations possible, and for their support of our growing archive, which you can view on the Rails YouTube channel. The REL has been free and independent for 25 years. A donation directly supports our writers, production staff, and operations. Support our work through the link in the chat. And if you're free, join us tomorrow at 1 p.m. for a conversation with Olivia Van Queken, Ginevra de Blasio, and Cedric Chisholm on the event of Bastard Rhyme at Matthew Brown. And as is Rail tradition, you can now all unmute and say hello and goodbye as you leave. Thank you all so much again.
Thank you all.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank
Thank you
you.
so
Thank
Thank
you
you
much.
so
so
much.
much.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Khalil.
Bye.
Thank
Thank
you
you,
so
See you,
much.
Khalil.
Good
Ajay.
job. Thanks
Bye.
so
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you,
Thank
Ajay.
you.
Amazing.
Thank you, you guys.
Great
Such a
show.
great
Well
one.
done.
That was
Go see the
amazing.
show, please.